Afternoon. Dear colleagues, Excellencies, dear colleagues, welcome back. The second plenary meeting is called to order. You get the floor for an update?
I don't know what that announcement is, so just hang on a second. Oh yeah, okay, that's fine. Yeah, you also have to close this speaker as well.
Dear colleagues, before we proceed, I would like to give the floor to the Secretary General of this meeting for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to remind delegations that the draft list of participants has been circulated as document TPNW/MSP/2022/CRP5. It is also available on the meeting website. Delegations are invited to review the draft list of participants and communicate any changes and corrections to the Secretariat by the end of the day tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this announcement. I also wanted to remind delegations that the list of speakers is now closed. We will now continue with our general exchange of views. I should like to inform delegations of the state of the list of speakers for the general debate. We have 27 states parties, 5 signatory states, 8 other observer states, 3 international organizations, and 4 non-governmental organizations. As announced at the beginning of the general exchange of views, which I'm reading what I've already said, so that the list of speakers is closed. I also recall the meeting's decision to limit the time for each intervention to 5 minutes. So you've heard that we have a long list of speakers, so please I ask all delegations to try to stick to this time limit. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malaysia.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Malaysia is honored to participate in this inaugural meeting of states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, a gathering of particular moment in our collective endeavors to achieve a world free of nuclear weapons. Indeed, this is a goal which has been deferred far too long and one towards which all nations and peoples should redouble their efforts. In our national submission to the International Court of Justice prior to the rendering of its seminal 1996 advisory opinion on the legality of the threat of use of nuclear weapons, Malaysia deplored the genocidal nature of such weapons, the existence of which had created an unprecedented disparity of power between the nuclear haves and have-nots. Malaysia further asserted that if no progress were made in the implementation of Article 6 of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, such disparity would persist and continue to pose grave threats to human civilizations. These comments have unfortunately been vindicated by the passage of time and remain valid for more than a quarter century later. Today, nuclear weapons still feature prominently in the strategies and doctrines of states which possess them, purportedly as elements required for the maintenance of security and stability. Arsenals are constantly modernized and upgraded, and the very concept of deterrence is predicated on the credibility of the threat that nuclear weapons may be used. The inherent danger of these weapons is thrown into sharp relief in times of heightened geopolitical tension. This poignantly reminds us that nuclear weapons must be entirely abolished if we are truly to realize the aspirations for peace and security on the part of the global community at large, rather than a select few. The TPNW is undoubtedly a significant contribution to the global disarmament and non-proliferation architecture. It is underpinned by strong ethical and security imperatives and rests on a firm legal foundation. It reflects the will of its states parties to fill a long-standing lacuna in the disarmament regime through a forward-looking instrument proscribing nuclear weapons altogether in a manner which is complementary to the NPT. Nonetheless, the adoption and entry into force of the TPNW should be regarded as only the first step in reinvigorating global discourse, and above all, action on disarmament. Much more needs to be done to unravel deeply rooted doctrinal approaches and policies which aim to perpetuate the existence of nuclear weapons. Mr. President, Malaysia commends you and the Austrian government for your able stewardship of the preparatory process leading to this meeting. We are heartened that state parties and signatory states, as well as academics and non-governmental organizations, have had productive exchanges of views on a broad swathe of issues concerning the overarching principles and effective operationalizations of the TPNW. The treaty's purpose evidently goes beyond political stigmatization of nuclear weapons and their dire humanitarian consequences. State parties fully intend the TPNW to be an instrument of great consequence in very practical terms based on sound scientific and technical considerations. It is our fervent belief that the treaty will make impactful and concrete contributions in our steady advance towards the day when the entire world will finally become one unbroken nuclear weapon-free zone. Malaysia is confident that the TPNW's carefully crafted provisions and our unceasing work as state parties will lay the groundwork for the prospective accession, God willing, of nuclear hosting states and ultimately states which own, possess or control nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices. To this end, we should continue to engage constructively with all relevant parties, even those who are among the treaty's most fervent detractors. As we commit ourselves unequivocally to the objectives and principles of the treaty, much work inevitably remains to be done. Let us move forward in the same spirit of solidarity and concern for life and the future of our planet. May succeeding generations be safe not only from the scourge of war, as boldly declared in the preamble of the Charter of the United Nations, but also from the unspeakable horrors of nuclear weapons in the interest of common security, peace, and sustainable development for all humanity. I thank you.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Malaysia for his statement and for the kind words addressed to the chair. And now I would like to give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ecuador.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. We'd like to congratulate you for being elected as president to this first meeting of states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and in particular for your distinguished work in the preparatory process leading up to the holding of this important meeting and the proposal of a plan of action. Ecuador, as party to the Tlatelolco Treaty, the first instrument on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, through constitutional mandate and also through its long-standing tradition based on the principles of peace, humanitarian law and human rights, denounces the development, possession and use of nuclear weapons, as these are things that may lead as things that are pillars for my country. My country is firmly committed to nuclear disarmament and the non-proliferation regime, and so we strongly support the mandates and premises contained within the TPNW. Ecuador supports the goal of strengthening the treaty as part of the disarmament and non-proliferation architecture, as the TPNW is a complementary and necessary instrument for banning nuclear weapons. Therefore, we support efforts towards its implementation in order to make it functional, connecting it with global challenges and thematic aspects such as the gender perspective in its various spheres of application. Chair, on the occasion of this meeting, Ecuador would like to recall its historic role in diplomacy when it came to efforts for a world free of nuclear weapons, such as its active participation as rapporteur in the First Committee meeting of 1946, as Secretary General of OPANAL in 1971, and continuously in multilateral non-proliferation fora such as TPNW. Also, my delegation recognises the valuable contribution made by civil society, academia and in particular ICANN when it comes to efforts made in this field. Chair, the universalisation of this treaty is particularly relevant, and Ecuador, in its national capacity, is making bilateral efforts and promoting better support and more ratification of the TPNW. And so we would like to highlight the participation of delegations from signatory and observer countries, in particular those who have not yet adhered to the treaty. And we'd like to invite them to consider signing up to this instrument as soon as possible. Ecuador is concerned to see that peace in Europe has been threatened over the past few months, and so we would like to condemn the military aggression by the Russian Federation against Ukraine, which violate the basic principles of international law and the UN Charter. As well as the devastating consequences for Ukraine, the political rhetoric has laid bare the relevance of the threat and the risk of a nuclear confrontation. In this context, I would like to recall the joint statement made by 14 countries, including Ecuador, about nuclear deterrence in New York on the 1st of March 2022. Ecuador's position in this field is unequivocal, and its vision when it comes to the implementation of the treaty is based on serious concerns about the catastrophic consequences for humanity that would be posed by the use of nuclear weapons and the threat for the international community. In this context, Ecuador would like to highlight and thank the government of Austria for their contribution to organising and the results obtained from this conference on the conference on the impact, humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons, as well as the ICRC. We would also like to recognise Austria's leadership and congratulate Mexico and Kazakhstan, as they will be presiding over the second and third meetings of these states parties. Finally, Ecuador would like to recall that we are closer now to the 100-year anniversary of the forming of the UN than to its foundation, and that should give us pause for thought about the importance of multilateralism and the need to speed up the universalisation and effective application of this treaty, which without doubt would be a victory for humanity. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Ecuador for her statement, and I would now like to give the floor to the distinguished representative of Guyana.
Mr. President, Guyana is pleased to participate in this first meeting of state parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. On behalf of my government, and indeed on my own behalf, allow me to congratulate you on your appointment as President of the first meeting of state parties to the TPNW. We commend you for your leadership and express our full confidence in your ability to expertly steer our work. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the facilitators of the various working papers for their constructive contribution to this meeting. Mr. President, Guyana is very pleased that the TPNW came into force in January 2021. making the use of nuclear weapons illegal under international law. Yet, as long as nuclear weapons exist, there is a risk that they may be used again. Indeed, this risk appears to be growing. Guyana, therefore, remains deeply concerned about the continued existence of nuclear weapons, weapons which are indiscriminate and which pose a risk of catastrophic humanitarian and environmental consequences. We are equally concerned at the promulgation of the idea that nuclear weapons serve as a deterrence and thus are necessary for national security. Even more alarming is the growing pervasiveness of rhetoric which seek to normalize the threat of use of such weapons. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, mutually assured destruction can never be a good policy. Nuclear weapons have no place in our world. They are not useful deterrents. Rather, they cultivate a state of insecurity and false defensiveness, which exacerbate the risk of their use, whether deliberately or by accident, or even as a result of miscalculation. This would have devastating consequences for all of us. As a developing country, Guyana deems it unconscionable and perverse that scarce resources continue to be diverted towards the modernization of mass destruction, as millions of people continue to be mired in poverty, made worse by the COVID-19 pandemic. Funding is needed to support the global response to the pandemic and indeed the Sustainable Development Goals. This is where our collective focus should be. We maintain that the continued existence of nuclear weapons is contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations and to the spirit of the Charter. We call upon all states to ratify the TPNW and to commit to a world free of nuclear weapons. Mr. President, this first meeting of state parties is faced with a historic task. We meet to develop a blueprint for the implementation of the TPNW and must do so, conscious of the fact that nuclear weapons today have an expanded role in military doctrines. Achieving the objectives and purposes of the TPNW in this current environment would require political will, partnership, and collaboration at all levels to promote its universality. Since signing and ratifying the treaty on September 20, 2017, in fact, we were the first to do so, Guyana has consistently promoted its universalization. In June 2019, we partnered with ICANN to host a regional forum on the TPNW for CARICOM member states, following which 3 countries signed the TPNW. What we learned from this positive experience is that cooperation and assistance are critical to realizing the goal of universalization and to effectively implement the treaty. We welcome the commitments that states and other stakeholders have made to promote adherence through education, advocacy, and capacity building, and look forward to collaborating on some of these initiatives. We acknowledge the role that civil society has played in building awareness and enhancing understanding of the provisions of the TPNW, and encourage their further work in this regard. Lastly, Mr. President, I would like to express my delegation's appreciation to the donors of the sponsorship program for supporting the participation of delegations from least developed countries and small island developing states in this meeting. I hope that the level of optimism and determination expressed here today will continue to motivate us as we strive to achieve a world free of nuclear weapons. I thank you.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Guyana for her statement and for the kind words addressed to the chair. We've received a message from the interpreters asking that all speakers speak more closely to the microphones, please. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kiribati.
Test. Mr. President, ministers, High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, Your Excellencies and distinguished participants. On behalf of the government and the people of the Republic of Kiribati, I would like to express my sincere congratulations to His Excellency Ambassador Alexander Kmentt on your assumption as President of the first meeting of state parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Today marks a historic day, a day in which we have risen up to say no to nuclear weapons. Mr. President, Kiribati has long supported a world free of nuclear weapons, having experienced 33 thermonuclear tests by the United Kingdom and the United States of America. Kiribati was motivated to join with dozens of states to sign and ratify the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. On April 28, 1958, the UK detonated its largest thermonuclear test under Operation Grapple. The 500 citizens of Kiribati living on Kirismes at the time of the test received little protection and inadequate warning. Not being aware of the dangers of such tests, most of them lifted the tarpaulin cover provided for them to catch a glimpse of the spectacular display of the intensely hot cloud of fire above them. Many of those people complained about all sorts of untreatable illnesses and health complications, most of which resulted in death. There were numerous cases of cancer, congenital disabilities, and abnormalities with newborn babies. Cases of these kinds persist with descendants of those on the island when the tests were carried out. Recognizing our moral duty to help our citizens and the Pacific region, Kiribati agreed to serve as a co-facilitator on implementing Articles 6 and 7, the positive obligations of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons with Kazakhstan. Over the past year, we developed a working paper on Articles 6 and 7 with Kazakhstan and our good friends from the academia and civil society. We organized consultations with state parties, youth groups, and civil society. We produced a series of recommendations for the state parties to consider. One of the recommendations is to establish an international trust fund for affected states. We further request the establishment of an independent scientific advisory group to assist affected state parties with victim assistance, environmental remediation, and cleaning up contaminated sites. It is crucial for scientists to work with affected state parties and provide their expertise while also listening to the requests of these state parties. We wish to continue our work on the positive obligations, and thus it is our desire to co-chair the Intersessional Working Group on the Positive Obligations of the TPNW. Mr. President, in the lead up to the first MSP, Kiribati has encouraged youth to rise up and share their personal stories about nuclear testing in the Pacific region. We have often told them never to give up and reminded them that their stories must be heard. We are proud that youth from the Pacific are present in this room today, and we thank our partner, Kazakhstan, for making this possible. The international community must listen to the voices of youth and those whose families have suffered from nuclear testing. The international community cannot forget how the former colonial powers treated innocent Pacific Islanders in their pursuit of weapons of mass destruction. Mr. President, nuclear weapons undermine the core tenets of international humanitarian law, and it is unacceptable that a small group of states are spending billions in modernizing and maintaining their nuclear arsenals. These weapons are on hair trigger alert and are ready to annihilate the world. We cannot allow these immoral weapons to continue to threaten humanity. How longer must we live with the danger of a nuclear war? It is indeed time for us as state parties to take concrete actions on the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. The TPNW is a key component of the international disarmament architecture. We are ready to take action to establish a safer and saner world, free of illegal and immoral weapons. In this regard, I am pleased to announce that Kiribati is ready to host a TPNW Center on Christmas Island for the Pacific region, as announced by my president at the 76th session of the UN General Assembly. I thank you.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Kiribati for her statement, and now I invite the distinguished delegate of Samoa.
Mr. President, as this is the first time my delegation is taking the floor, let me at the outset convey on behalf of my government of Samoa our congratulations on the assumption of your office, and we extend our full support in the execution of your mandate during this inaugural meeting. As a small island developing state, our hopes of a better future for all peoples rely on the willingness of states to cooperate with the view towards respecting the values enshrined in the UN Charter. Working towards peace and security and addressing global threats is a collective task requiring common actions on all of us in good faith as custodians of the futures. Wars and conflicts is not a legacy we can afford to bequeath future generations. The total elimination of all forms of nuclear weapons is a vital step on the road to a more secure world, where the threat of total destruction of our planet is no longer a distinct possibility. Mutually assured destruction is not a mantra that Samoa supports, and is premised on the belief that the common sense and sanity will always prevail. However, one can look at what is happening now in Eastern Europe and the Korean Peninsula as an example of how the judgment of one person may not be the best defense against the assurance of our future, where nuclear war is not a threat. Rising tensions, the modernization of nuclear arsenals, the continued reliance on nuclear weapons in military and security concepts, as well as on high alert postures and threats regarding the possible use of nuclear weapons are widely seen as increasing the risk of a deliberate or accidental nuclear detonation. For its part, the Pacific is only well too aware of the catastrophic consequences of nuclear detonation as a result of its own experience, with over 300 nuclear weapon tests carried out over many years in our region. This has resulted in adverse long-term humanitarian and environmental impacts to many parts of the Pacific. Efforts by the Pacific countries to stop this testing, to promote the national security of each country in the region and common security of all, and so far as lies within the region's power, to retain the bounty and the beauty of its land and sea, are key factors in the adoption of the Treaty of Rarotonga in 1985 and the establishment of the South Pacific Nuclear-Free Zone. The continued existence of nuclear weapons pose a significant threat to the Pacific Islands and the way of life, with the imminent issue of nuclear waste. Impacts of any nuclear waste on potential harm of any level to reach our shores would mean the end of our way of life and livelihood, given we are ocean states, heavily reliant on our ocean for sustenance and continued food security. Mr. President, we strongly affirm that nuclear weapons, for as long as they continue to exist, would continue to pose a serious threat to global collective peace and security, to our environment, and to continued existence. At this important meeting, we must commit to concrete actions to implement, to the fullest extent possible, our obligations as state parties to the TPNW, including providing assistance to victims of nuclear weapons use and testing, remediate contaminated environments, and universalizing the treaty. It will also be an opportunity for states to discuss some of the treaty's technical details, like setting a deadline for the elimination of nuclear weapons for nuclear-armed states that joined under Article 4 of this treaty. We want a future of peaceful societies, free from conflict and threat of nuclear weapons, which must be dealt with through international law and cooperation and in accordance with the provisions of this treaty. I thank you, Mr. President.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Samoa, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Trinidad and Tobago.
Mr. President, at the outset, I wish to extend congratulations to you and to the other members of the Bureau on your election and assure you of Trinidad and Tobago's full support and cooperation. This inaugural meeting of the states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons represents a giant step for the preservation of humankind. As a member of a region that established the first nuclear weapons-free zone pursuant to the Treaty of Tlatelolco, Trinidad and Tobago joined the international community in celebrating the entry into force of the TPNW in January 2021. We remain convinced that it is only through the total elimination of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction that international peace and security can be guaranteed and secured. To the contrary, the continued existence, accumulation, and modernization of such weapons actually increases the threat level towards our collective security. The TPNW, therefore, is a decisive, positive step towards achieving a world safe and secure from mutual assured destruction. As a small island developing state, we rely on the strict observance by all states of the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations, the rule of law, and on international agreements as guarantors of our right to a secure and peaceful existence. Trinidad and Tobago's support for the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is in alignment with our National Development Strategy and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Mr. President, it is indeed lamentable that the international community still grapples with the noble, though necessary, goal of totally eliminating nuclear weapons. Worryingly, contemporary action is diametrically opposed to, and in fact, undermines the very concept and goal of disarmament, notwithstanding that we are well aware that the use or threat of use of nuclear weapons constitutes a clear violation of the Charter and of international law, including international humanitarian law. Trinidad and Tobago was encouraged by the joint statement of the leaders of the 5 nuclear weapon states on preventing nuclear war and avoiding arms races earlier this year that a nuclear war, and I quote, cannot be won and must never be fought, end quote. We continue to hope that those reassuring platitudes of responsible conduct on the part of nuclear weapon states will be matched sooner rather than later by genuine commitments that demonstrate bold and decisive leadership in the right direction. The evidence indicates that any resort to nuclear weapons will cause untold loss of life well beyond the theater of conflict, while simultaneously inflicting calamitous destruction on our environment, the food supply, and to our planet's natural ecosystems. Given these direct and far-reaching consequences for humankind and our irreplaceable habitat, Trinidad and Tobago is strong in its perspective that the use of nuclear weapons is not now, nor can it ever be an option, unless by some irrationality, the goal is the total annihilation of the human race, wrecking of the planet, and long-term misery and destitution. Given such a doomsday scenario, we robustly advocate the universality of the TPNW. Mr. President, we look forward to actively participating in this meeting to discuss, among other issues, the universalization of the TPNW. For us, this juncture represents a starting point to mobilize action to stigmatize the existence of nuclear weapons. We hope that the impetus of this meeting will incentivize other member states to become states parties. Therefore, we encourage those states that have not yet done so to sign and ratify the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, as it provides a window for immediate action towards full disarmament. Mr. President, I thank you.
I would like to thank the representative of Trinidad and Tobago for his statement. And I now turn to the representative of Cambodia. Please, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting Cambodia to participate in the first meeting of the state parties to TPNW held here in Vietnam. I wish to join other colleagues to wholeheartedly congratulate you, Mr. President, on your assumption of the presidency of the first meeting of the state parties to the TPNW. We congratulate the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, ICAN, on its 2017 Nobel Peace Prize, and wish to thank them for their untiring advocacy for the treaty and to raise awareness of the catastrophe, humanitarian, and environmental consequences of nuclear weapons. Amid the COVID-19 pandemic, the whole world is not yet free from this pandemic. At the same time, the world appears to face more new threats, with an increasing number of actors are involved in violence, including crimes, terrorist attacks, and other armed elements, especially the fearful threats by the present nuclear weapons posing unpredictable consequences to humankind. Due to the development of geopolitical and geostrategic situation, certain dimension of disarmament scenario may require updating. However, it would be a serious mistake to begin to take the current system apart or to allow it to integrate without having a clear, commonly agreed roadmap of the future security system. While we are gathering in this important meeting today, I wish to deliver my national statements as follows. Mr. President, Cambodia welcomed to the entry into force of the Treaty on Prohibition of the Nuclear Weapons on 22nd January 2021. With this initial legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons, Cambodia joined effort with the international community to prevent and suppress any activity prohibited under the TPNW, leading to the total elimination of nuclear weapons. Cambodia was among 122 states that voted in favor of TPNW adoption during the negotiation in New York in 2017. Confirming the country's commitment to the global nuclear disarmament endeavor, Cambodia signed and ratified the TPNW and was legally bound by this instrument in April 2021. Being state party to the TPNW in accordance with Article 2, Cambodia submitted an initial declaration to the United Nations Secretary General confirming that Cambodia does not own, possess, or control nuclear weapons and does not host any other state's nuclear weapons on its territory. Mr. President, Cambodia has signed and ratified many international legal instruments in full support of the Prohibition, Disarmament, and Non-Proliferation Weapons of Mass Destruction, such as the Chemical Weapons Convention, the Biological Weapons Convention, the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, the Bangkok Treaty, South Asia Nuclear Free Zone, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and other international instruments. Cambodia is fully committed to global nuclear disarmament. Article 54 of Cambodia Constitution clearly states that the manufacturing, use, and storage of nuclear, chemical, biological weapons are absolutely prohibited. Cambodia adopted and promulgated the law on prohibition chemical, nuclear, biological, and radiological weapons. As a state that has been heavily affected by the humanitarian galaxies of landmines and other explosive remnants of war, Cambodia is also a proud champion of the Anti-Personnel Landmine Ban Treaty. Mr. President, I regard this first meeting of the state parties to TPNW as a very important platform and historical event for reviewing the TPNW, exchanging dialogues, expressing issues of shared concern, and finding the consensual resolutions to the implementation of the TPNW. In response to the humanitarian impacts and consequences of any use of nuclear weapons, we call all states to comply with applicable international laws, as well as to reaffirm the commitment of all states to ensuring the world's peace and security. With regard to the ongoing threat of nuclear weapons to the world peace and security, we are deeply concerned, as many countries have yet to sign nor ratify the TPNW. As long as all states do not join hand in hand with the TPNW, the world is still in danger. In this regard, Cambodia calls upon all states to sign, ratify, or accede to join this important treaty at the earliest possible date. We also recognize the importance of peace and disarmament education, including by civil society and educational institutions, in universalizing the treaty, and call for its conclusion in the implementation of Article 12. Cambodia also welcomes both state and non-state parties to the TPNW to create a secure and conducive environment for achieving the ultimate goal of a world without nuclear weapons. We urge that all state parties have not any military confrontation, but increase mutual understanding and confidence, and we must double our efforts to promote bilateral, multilateral, diplomatic dialogues and negotiation, applying with the UN Charter and all related international laws. Cambodia's experience with the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Treaty has shown how crucial positive obligation can be in remediating contaminating environments, assisting victims, and providing risk education. Cambodia's My Action Program is an inclusive, age and gender-sensitive effort that centers affected communities, promotes the right of persons with disabilities, and engaging civil society, youth, and academic experts. Cambodia does welcome Article 6 and 7 of the TPNW on victim assistance, environmental remediation, and international cooperation and assistance, and calls for vigorous implementation, including through further work in the interstitial period. As its contribution to the to international cooperation, Cambodia stands ready, share its policy and technical experience with implementing similar provision addressing the humanitarian and environmental impact of other inhuman weapons such as landmines. In my conclusion, Mr. President, I would like to reiterate that peace is the prior source of sustainable development, freedom, and stability to our world. In this regard, Cambodia urges that all nations in the world cooperate and join hands to achieve to our goal of the total elimination of nuclear weapons. Thank you.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Cambodia for his statement. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mongolia, and I would like to remind the delegations to please try to stick to the 5 minutes limit. I give the floor to the delegation of Mongolia, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, at the outset, I would like to congratulate you, Mr. President, on assuming the important task of presiding over the first meeting of state parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We have no doubt that under your able leadership in the meeting will bear a solid outcome. My delegation pledges full support and cooperation. Mr. President, as we all witness today, the global security environment has been increasingly challenging and unpredictable. The existence of nuclear weapons and their possible use continues to pose a threat to international peace and security, more significantly to humanity. Thus, we share the view that the prohibition of nuclear weapons is a fundamental step towards the achievement and maintenance of nuclear weapon-free world. As the first legal binding international instrument to comprehensively prohibit nuclear weapons, the TPNW's entry into force set a milestone in the international efforts to ban these disastrous weapons, and treaty is instrumental in eliminating nuclear weapons. Mongolia has promoted universal adherence to the TPNW by co-sponsoring and consistently voting in favor of UN General Assembly resolution from the beginning, and called upon all states to sign, ratify, or accede to the treaty. We strongly believe that the TPNW enhances the legal framework for nuclear disarmament. We urge all the states to accede to this significant treaty, which will forge a new momentum towards achieving a world free of nuclear weapons. Taking this opportunity, I would like to stress the important role played by civil society organizations in advancing nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation negotiations, particularly the role of the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons throughout the whole process, from the first conference on the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons to the first meeting of state parties of the TPNW. As fully committed state party to NPT, CTPT, and TPNW, Mongolia reaffirms its commitment to nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation in all aspects, and continues its efforts in contributing to the international peace and security by promoting its nuclear weapons-free status. This year, we mark the 30th anniversary of Mongolia's nuclear weapon-free status. On this occasion, an international conference entitled Nuclear Weapon-Free Zones, Importance, Challenges, and Prospects was co-organized by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Mongolia and Blue Banner NGO in Ulaanbaatar mid-June this year. Mongolia has made considerable efforts to strengthen international peace and security and achieve its success in the past 30 years since it declared its territory as nuclear weapon-free status. the United Nations General Assembly has considered the issue related to the Mongolia's nuclear weapon-free status and adopted respective resolutions on a biannual basis since 1998. We thank all member states for their valuable and continuous support and close cooperation in implementing the resolution on Mongolia's international security and nuclear weapon-free status. Addressing security issues in the Northeast Asia is one of our foreign policy priorities, as it has a direct impact not only on regional but also on global peace and security. In 2014, Mongolia has initiated the Ulaanbaatar Dialogue on Northeast Asia, which has developed into a mechanism for facilitating talks and promoting mutual understanding and confidence building. Consequently, my country is hosting the 7th International Conference of the UB Dialogue end of this week in Ulaanbaatar. In closing, Mongolia will continue to cooperate with nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states to promote a world free of nuclear weapons and assures its commitment to it and support every international community efforts. Thank you, Mr. President.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Mongolia for his statement, and I now give the floor to Mayors for Peace.
Thank you, President Ambassador Kmentt. I welcome this opportunity to speak on behalf of Mayors for Peace and to commend the efforts made by all those involved in organizing this first meeting of state parties. Our network of member cities, which will commemorate its 40th anniversary on June 24th, has sought to achieve a world free of nuclear weapons, the same noble future vision embodied in the treaty before us today. Russia's aggression against Ukraine has evolved into attacking civilian indiscriminately and even repeatedly implying the use of nuclear weapons. It is our urgent priority to find a solution. However, that solution must not be one that ruins all that humanity has built to make the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of war and nuclear attacks a thing of the past. We must reawaken the world now. The Hibakusha have conveyed their fervent plea that no one else should suffer as we have, that no one else, includes all those who are suffering from this tragic war, while challenging the only way to faithfully answer their appeal is to advance nuclear disarmament, leading to their total elimination. This is a fact that has never changed. Now, let all of us, the UN, national governments, and civil society collaborate urgently for the effective implementation of this treaty directed towards its noble future vision. In doing so, it is imperative to have the nuclear-armed states deepen their understanding of the inhumane nature of nuclear weapons and the uncertainty of nuclear arsenal management by winning additional states parties to this treaty, especially non-nuclear weapon states. To that end, Mayors for Peace implements initiatives under the PX vision for peaceful transformation to a sustainable world, that include encouraging political leaders and citizens to visit the atomic-bombed cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Both cities strive to welcome as many people as possible in our cities. And next year, the G7 Leaders Summit will be held in Hiroshima. It is our sincere hope that on this occasion, all these 7 leaders, including the leaders of the nuclear-armed states, will profoundly accept the spirit of Hiroshima, which seeks a peaceful, nuclear weapon-free world. Now, more than ever, we must have all people, the people of your states, of the nuclear-armed states, of their allies, even national leaders, stand with us in the pursuit of nuclear weapons abolition and lasting world peace. I invite all in attendance to join us in the endeavor fulfilling the ambitious goal of this treaty, including the improvement and enrichment of victim assistance provision, is in line with the urgent plea of the Hibakusha of Hiroshima. I would like to extend my very best wishes for the success of this meeting in anticipation of answering the Hibakusha's calls. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank Mayor Matsui of Hiroshima, speaking on behalf of Mayors for Peace. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Namibia.
Ambassador Kmentt, honorable ministers, your excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I would like to extend our warm congratulations to you, Ambassador, on your election as President of the first meeting of states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We sincerely thank you for your open and exceptional approach in conducting a series of consultations prior to the meeting. We are confident that with your able leadership, the meeting will achieve its successful conclusion, and we assure you of Namibia's full support. We further extend our appreciation to the Secretariat for all the preparatory work done in organizing this meeting. Mr. President, 8 years ago, in this beautiful city of Vienna, a humanitarian pledge was made to bring into the disarmament regime a humanitarian perspective to address the effect of any usage of nuclear weapons. This pledge furthermore sought to identify and pursue effective measures to fill the legal gap for the prohibition and elimination of nuclear weapons. Today, those objectives, which of course became our TPNW, remains as relevant as ever. We therefore welcome the entry into force of this treaty on the 22nd of January 2021 and the convening of this first meeting of states parties. The TPNW is the only multilateral treaty that calls for the prohibition and total elimination of nuclear weapons, and in this context complements nuclear weapons-free zones and the NPT. Consistent with our obligations to uphold nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament global norms, Namibia ratified the TPNW on 21 March 2020. Mr. President, we must acknowledge that any use of nuclear weapons has devastating humanitarian consequences, and that these weapons continue to be an existential threat to humanity. History has taught us the horror of the use of nuclear weapons and/or of nuclear explosions, and their aftermath, especially the humanitarian consequences, has long-lasting effects that continue to be felt and experienced to date. This was confirmed this morning by the testimony that we all listened to. We can also not ignore the devastating environmental damage that can be caused by any use of a nuclear weapon or nuclear explosion. This relates to air, soil, water, and of course the food supply, issues that are of paramount importance within the Sustainable Development Goals. With all the current threats to the SDGs, can we afford a nuclear threat as well? The answer is obviously no. Mr. President, Namibia is party to most disarmament instruments, including the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and is committed to their full implementation. It is our strong belief that the TPNW is not competing or undermining other international disarmament instruments, but rather that it reinforces and complements the entire global disarmament and non-proliferation regime, including the nuclear disarmament obligations under the NPT, as well as the objectives of the CTBT and various nuclear weapons-free zones, of which in Africa, of course, we have the Pelindaba. Mr. President, Namibia remains concerned that nuclear weapon states continue to spend tremendous amounts of money to modernize, upgrade, refurbish, and extend the lives of their nuclear weapons and related facilities. We believe that the continued existence and possession of nuclear weapons do not guarantee security, but rather substantially increase the risk of their potential use. It is our hope that such resources should be channeled to research, training, and advancement of peaceful users, including technology transfer to states embarking on nuclear power programs. Splendid examples exist of states that have already dismantled and abandoned their nuclear weapons programs and arsenals. Mr. President, I wish to conclude by referring to the existing narrative against the treaty and the perceived limited influence of states parties of the TPNW. These factors make it even more important for all of us to recognize the sense of responsibility to popularize the treaty, to work towards its implementation, and to work towards implementing its aspirations and achieve the ultimate goal of its universalization that would free the world from nuclear weapons. It is incumbent on all states, including the nuclear weapon states, to exert profound and concrete measures towards realizing the objectives of nuclear disarmament. I think it is justified to repeat one more time what we heard from the UN Secretary General this morning, when he said, let's eliminate these weapons before they eliminate us. I thank you.
I'd like to thank the distinguished representative of Namibia for her statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uruguay.
Señor Presidente.
Chair, on behalf of Uruguay, we would like to congratulate you both on my behalf and also on behalf of my country on your nomination as president. Your career in this field has facilitated the preparatory work for this meeting of the states parties to the TPNW. As well as congratulating you for your nomination, I would like to assure you that we will make every effort to support you both in the meeting today and in the future. Presidents, authorities, colleagues, my country is delighted to be celebrating the entry into force of this treaty with you, which happened in 2021 and which was a landmark for the international community and which we hope will lead to nuclear weapons being explicitly and completely banned. Uruguay is recognised as a peaceful state, a defender of international law and an upholder of these principles, which have guided our country's action in terms of its foreign policy. We are proud to say that we are part of one of the first nuclear weapons-free zones in the world, established by the Tlatelolco Treaty, banning nuclear weapons in Latin America and the Caribbean, and establishing our region as a nuclear weapon-free zone. We would like to encourage other such zones to be set up and that these zones, when set up, are strictly respected. Uruguay is committed to the international disarmament and non-proliferation architecture based on the understanding that these are, and understanding that the TPNW is a hugely valuable tool for this, which will help complement the framework of international law, but which will also respond to the need for our people to have a humanitarian focus and to make progress in this topic. In this respect, Uruguay is committed to supporting the spirit of this treaty and to comply with its legal commitments in the strictest possible way for its whole scope to ensure that we have a world free of nuclear weapons. There is no doubt that our shared goal of the complete elimination of nuclear weapons can only be achieved through multilateralism. Therefore, we would like to encourage the strengthening of the international disarmament system using the TPNW as a starting point, as this is an equal, non-discriminatory treaty that we believe adds to the NPT. And so we would like to welcome the contribution made by the TPNW for Article 6 of the NPT by putting into force a comprehensive ban on nuclear weapons. President, Uruguay would like to encourage broad participation from civil society. We have witnessed the valuable contributions they can make to our topic. We would also like to thank states who have come to this session for their participation, even if they have come as observers, and at the same time we would like to encourage states that have not yet come as observers to participate in our upcoming meetings. Uruguay is greatly concerned at the quantity of nuclear weapons that countries possess and the worrying numbers when you look at these arsenals. We also regret that commitments to international disarmament have not been complied with. Perhaps they reduce the number of weapons, but their capacity for destruction has been increased, which means that the risk is in fact increased. Also, my country would like to express its regret at the activities carried out by certain states when it comes to enriching their fissile material in spite of legal commitments that they have made to the international community. We believe that we need to encourage very tight cooperation with organisations that work in this field, like the IAEA, and we strongly value their safeguarding regime, as well as the CTBTO and their monitoring system, as this helps to monitor states that continue to pursue nuclear weapons. Now, more than ever, we need to consider the catastrophic humanitarian consequences that the use of nuclear weapons could cause. These run completely contrary to the inalienable right to life. Unfortunately, we've borne witness to the damage caused by the use of nuclear weapons, not only damage to life, but also to development of whole societies, which have regrettably caused consequences that have affected generation after generation without receiving any compensation as victims of this. Uruguay, therefore, welcomes the human focus that forms the basis of the TPNW. We mustn't forget that international law and the UN system have the ultimate goal of protecting human beings, who, in their vast majority, are against the possession, use or threat of use of nuclear weapons. We would like to state that Uruguay strongly defends the inalienable right of all states to the peaceful use of nuclear energy. And we understand that this right must, of course, be for development and well-being of our countries. However, we cannot share the logic of nuclear deterrence, which is put forward by certain security doctrines, by stating that the very threat of the use of nuclear weapons is immoral and legally unacceptable. The threat to the whole of society by the very existence of nuclear weapons is so severe that it means that our country and all of us need to work tirelessly to combat it. Fully convinced of the value of the TPNW for the international disarmament and non-proliferation environment, we would like to call on the international community to sign and to ratify this treaty as soon as possible. And so we would like to call on member states of the TPNW to work to broaden its membership and to ensure its full and effective implementation as a shared tool for effectively facing the dangers posed by nuclear weapons for our peoples. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank the distinguished I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Uruguay, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the plurinational state of Bolivia.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, President. On behalf of Bolivia, I would like to congratulate you for leading this first meeting of states parties on the TPNW. We are sure that under your leadership we can achieve our desired goals. And of course you can count on the support of my delegation. Chair, it's a reality for our peoples at the moment that the discourse around nuclear weapons has increased. The qualitative arms race continues apace. We currently find ourselves at a particular challenging time for international peace and security. Without doubt, we're living in an age of increasing uncertainty and instability across the globe. We regret that over the past few years, over $2 trillion has been spent on military spending. And the fact that the COVID-19 pandemic has not affected increasing spending on military and security policies have been spent more on security than on health, victims and education. It's also worrying that the 9 states that have capability to launch a nuclear attack have around 13,000 nuclear weapons between them, 2 million of which are currently in a state of high operative alert. Unfortunately, we understand that these types of weapons are the most inhumane weapons. Their impact do not know national borders, and they will have severe impacts on human survival, the environment, socio-economic development and the global economy, among other things. Chair, Bolivia is proud to have been to be part of one of the first densely populated nuclear weapons-free zones in the world through the Tlatelolco Treaty, as well as one of the first regions to declare itself to be a zone of peace. In the framework of this commitment to nuclear disarmament, Bolivia declared itself constitutionally to be a peaceful state, and our political constitution lays out the prohibition of the manufacturing of the use of chemical, biological and nuclear weapons across the whole Bolivian territory, as well as the transit or depositing of nuclear waste. With this conviction and the historic passing of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in the 6th of August, we became the 25th state to ratify this treaty. Nuclear disarmament is not only an international legal obligation, it's in fact a moral imperative. We believe that it is indefensible and unsustainable for nuclear weapons to be increasing without. This means that we cannot safely guarantee people's safety. And so we need to limit the role of these types of weapons, as well as the doctrines, strategies and security policies. While these weapons exist, it is inconceivable that one day they won't be used, whether that's by accident, error or deliberately. When a state, as soon as one state has nuclear weapons, others will want to have them. It's over 7 decades since it's taken 7 decades for us to adopt a legally binding treaty like this one, which provides us with hope that one day nuclear weapons will be completely prohibited. And so we would like to make a call to all states who have not yet done so to quickly ratify this treaty. President, as we've seen recently, we bear the responsibility to ensure that the future generations can have the safest possible future. And so this is why we have the challenge to ensure that we promote a culture of life and peace in this generation for a fair, solidarity-based and equal society based on respect and equality. We hope that the effects, we're not seeing such a catastrophic effect with climate change that we can't find solutions to. We hope that here this is the starting point of a road towards the full prohibition and elimination of nuclear weapons. Thank you.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Bolivia, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of El Salvador.
Señor Presidente, en nombre del Gobierno.
Thank you. On behalf of the government of El Salvador, we would like to express our sincere congratulations for your election as president of this first meeting of states parties to the TPNW. We would also like to congratulate the representatives of Kazakhstan, Mexico and Thailand for having been elected as vice presidents. El Salvador welcomes this first meeting of states parties to the TPNW. And we hope that this meeting helps to consolidate the treaty with a view to its universalisation. And so we would like to welcome the ratification of this treaty by Cabo Verde, Grenada, Timor-Leste, and in particular Guatemala, which means that all Central American countries are now part of this important treaty.
Además,
also, my delegation would like to thank the government of Austria for holding the Vienna Conference on the Humanitarian Impact of Nuclear Weapons 2022, which has really helped to shed more light on the devastating effects of nuclear weapons for humanity. President, distinguished delegates, El Salvador strongly supports all instruments and initiatives that lead to the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons and general and complete disarmament of weapons of mass destruction. Therefore, El Salvador firmly supports the holding of this conference and actively participated in negotiations that led to the adoption of the TPNW in the framework of the 72nd UN General Assembly in New York, signing it on the 20th of September 2017 and ratifying it on the 30th of January 2019. Without doubt, this treaty is an essential step for the prevention of the use of nuclear weapons and achieving and sustaining a world free of nuclear weapons. For my country, the TPNW, the NPT, and the CTBT work together in harmony and help achieve the end goal of a world free of nuclear weapons. El Salvador is part of a group of countries that are convinced that nuclear energy should be used only for peaceful purposes, and as such we deplore the threat to humanity that we see with the continued existence of nuclear weapons, as well as the holding of nuclear tests for experimental purposes. The existence of nuclear weapons is a persistent threat, and their use will have a devastating effect on humanity, human health, the environment, agriculture, and food security, which is why El Salvador supports all efforts aimed at the universalization of this treaty, in particular given the current circumstances of threat that we are seeing across the world. The prevention of nuclear weapons is incredibly important and urgent, and we need to place great priority on it. Building security based on nuclear deterrence is simply not sustainable. While nuclear weapons exist, we will continue to see a potential for their use. President, this delegation supports the proposal of creating a scientific and technical advisory group that would advise us on the application of Article 4 of the treaty. We recognise the contribution made by civil society and international organisations in the negotiation of this treaty, and we would also like to thank observers for their participation, and we would invite them to become a part of this hugely valuable international instrument. Finally, El Salvador, as a country that does not possess, produce, import or store weapons of mass destruction, and as a member of a region that is completely free of nuclear weapons, we would like to reassert our commitment to working for nuclear development as the sole guarantee of peace, security and the full respect of human rights across all of our societies. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegate of El Salvador for her statement. I would like to give the floor back to Mayors for Peace because I moved on too quickly before, and I would also like to give the opportunity to the Mayor of Nagasaki to speak. So with the indulgence of delegations, please, Mr. Mayor, you have the floor.
Chairman, thank you very much. Distinguished delegates and leaders of civil groups, I am田上富久, Mayor of Nagasaki. It is an honor to address you on such a momentous occasion as this, the starting point for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. The Hibakusha, the survivors of the atomic bombing, have praised the treaty, calling it a ray of hope, illuminating the path toward the realization of a world free of nuclear weapons. They have rejoiced greatly in its adoption. In the 2017 Nagasaki Peace Declaration, delivered at the Nagasaki Peace Ceremony on August 9th, I stated that I'd like to call this treaty, which mentions the suffering and struggles of the Hibakusha, the Hiroshima-Nagasaki Treaty. On this occasion, let me again express my respect and gratitude to everyone's efforts toward the creation of the treaty, and also their courageous efforts and unwavering commitment to abolish nuclear weapons. Almost a year and a half has passed since the treaty has come into effect, and now, amid the Ukraine crisis, threats of nuclear force are being made, and there is a risk that nuclear weapons will be used again. Now, more than ever, I feel that the existence of the treaty is very important, as it is the only international treaty that clearly prohibits the immediate crisis the world is now facing. At such a time of crisis, preventing the use of nuclear weapons and threats of nuclear force is a common behavioral principle that can be shared among us, even with the countries not party to the treaty. By making this principle universal, I believe that we can achieve our final goal of nuclear weapons abolition without allowing their use. At present, the path to a world free of nuclear weapons is becoming increasingly steep. In such chaotic times, where it seems that we are losing our way, it is important to take heart and remember the words of the Hibakusha, who recall their painful memories to tell us their stories to spare this generation and the next what they have been through. The suffering they have endured is why this treaty exists, and while we cannot go back and experience that pain ourselves, we can empathize with their wishes. At this time, where the risk of another Hiroshima and Nagasaki is mounting, we must come together under the Hibakusha's motto of "Make Nagasaki the last atomic bombing site," and foster a global sense of empathy to combat the use of nuclear weapons. In conclusion, I hope that this conference leads to great progress and proves to be an opportunity that promotes momentum toward the abolition of nuclear weapons. Thank you.
I would like to thank the Mayor of Nagasaki for his statement speaking on behalf of Mayors for Peace. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Laos People's Democratic Republic.
Mr. President, Excellency, distinguished guests, on behalf of the government of the Lao People's Democratic Republic, I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate you, Ambassador Alexander Kmentt, on your election as the president of the first meeting of State Party. Lao PDR assure you our full support of your president. I would also like to commend Australian government and the Secretariat team for their excellent work organizing this first meeting of the State Party in this beautiful city of Vienna. Moreover, I would like to express our congratulations to Cabo Verde, Grenada, Timor-Leste for your timely ratification to the TPNW and expanded our member to 65 state party. Mr. President, Lao PDR always attaches great importance to international disarmament and non-proliferation regime and continuously support international effort in making our world free from nuclear weapons. Lao PDR is of the view that nuclear weapon is the remain threat to international peace and security that continue to pose grave risk to human safety. In this regard, the Lao PDR expressed our concern of the existing nuclear weapon and the continuation, proliferate, modernize their weapon of mass destruction. From the past history, we have witnessed the high risk of intentional, accidental, mistaken, and unauthorized use of nuclear weapons, which can lead to indescribable catastrophic destruction of humanity and environment. Therefore, if this mass destruction weapon exists, it continues to pose severe threats to humanity, environment, and we believe that only the total elimination of nuclear weapons, it is the ultimate goal to secure our world from nuclear catastrophe. Mr. President, since the beginning, the Lao PDR, among other like-minded member states, had joined force in driving the negotiation of the TPNW. Despite the very complex negotiating process, we have approved that the humanitarian spirit in maintaining peaceful world without nuclear weapons is strong. As it has reflected the adoption of the treaty in 2017, the fact that we own member states and observers have gathering here today as a welcome the first international treaty banning nuclear weapons marks the milestone in the nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. More important, the entry into force of the TPNW in 2021 has officially legitimated nuclear weapons in this crucial step to complete elimination of nuclear weapons. In this connection, once again, I would like to reiterate our consistent policy that the Lao PDR does not have capacity, no ability, and will not produce or develop nuclear weapon, as well as possess or control any nuclear weapon under its jurisdiction. Mr. President, Lao PDR reaffirm our commitment as we have submitted the declaration pursuant to the Article 2 of the TPNW, and we call on all states to join the TPNW in order to free our world from nuclear weapons and secure sustainable peace and security for everyone. I thank you, Mr. President.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of the Lao People's Democratic Republic and now give the floor to the distinguished delegate of Bangladesh.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you, Mr. President, for your election. We are confident that under your able stewardship, which you have demonstrated so well during the preparations for and lead up to this meeting, will make our first meeting of the states parties a success. I'd also like to sincerely thank the government of Austria for hosting this important meeting, as well as the preparatory process, while our appreciation goes to UNODA for the excellent preparation and documentation for this meeting. Mr. President, it is heartening to see the broad participation at this meeting of signatory states and observers, as well as civil society representatives and survivors of nuclear weapons use and testing. With the entry into force of the treaty on 22nd January 2021, we achieved a milestone. With that, nuclear weapons are now explicitly and comprehensively prohibited by international law. We must now redouble our efforts for full and effective implementation of the treaty. At the same time, we must relentlessly work for its universal adherence. In that context, we congratulate Cabo Verde, Grenada, and Timor-Leste as new parties to the treaty. We deeply appreciate their commitment to the cause of nuclear disarmament and encourage other non-parties to follow the lead. We strongly believe that the political declaration of this meeting will act as a guiding document to fulfill our obligations for the success of the treaty. Mr. President, born out of the horrors of the Second World War, the United Nations envisioned a world free of nuclear weapons in its very first resolution. 77 years have since passed. Yet, our present and future generations continue to live under the specter of nuclear catastrophe. The international community must be united against the perpetual holding of nuclear weapons by a handful of states in total disregard of the safety and security of the entire humanity. Mr. President, Bangladesh is committed to general and complete disarmament, an obligation embedded in its constitution. Father of our nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, in his maiden speech at the UN General Assembly in 1974, urged to free the world from the scourge of nuclear war. That forms the cornerstone of Bangladesh's total and unwavering commitment and adherence to nuclear disarmament. Our position towards nuclear weapons is unambiguously clear. We believe that these weapons secure no one. Instead, they endanger everyone's security. Hence, the ultimate guarantee of security lies only in the total elimination of nuclear weapons. Bangladesh has always assumed higher obligations under all major multilateral disarmament treaties. We are also among the first 50 countries that have ratified the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Mr. President, today, as we reiterate our commitment for the elimination of nuclear weapons, I would like to flag a few points. First, the world must unequivocally reject the use of nuclear weapons, but support the peaceful use of nuclear technology for the benefit of humankind. Second, as long as there remain nuclear weapons at the hands of some states, so remains the motivation for others to acquire them. There are enormous humanitarian risks and consequences which we simply cannot afford. There also remains a risk of use of these weapons, either by accident or by design. The grave danger of falling of these weapons into the hands of the terrorists cannot be overlooked. Therefore, the total abolition of nuclear weapons is the only safeguard and should be pursued with urgency. Third, nuclear weapon states must extend to the non-nuclear weapon states effective, unconditional, and non-discriminatory assurances against the use of or threat of use of nuclear weapons. And finally, the COVID-19 pandemic has shown that stockpiles of weapons are no defense against invincible enemies. The pandemic has reinforced our belief that arms races do not save lives. States should cease senseless investments in non-productive armament purposes and instead redirect the world's finite resources to address climate change, ensure food security, achieve the SDGs, and promote peace and stability. Mr. President, the elimination of nuclear weapons requires collective action, strong political will, and determination. At this first meeting of the states parties, let us recommit to strengthen our efforts towards the goal of a peaceful and nuclear weapons-free world. Bangladesh stands ready to work together with the international community towards that goal. I thank you, Mr. President.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Bangladesh for his statement. And now I invite the distinguished representative of Jamaica.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I congratulate you on assuming your role as president of this historic meeting. I'm confident that you will ably guide our work to a successful conclusion and reiterate my delegation's commitment to supporting you in that endeavor. Jamaica is pleased to participate in this first meeting of states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. As an ardent proponent of our shared goal and commitment to promote peace and international security, Jamaica has long been a champion of all efforts to pursue disarmament. We reaffirm our strong belief that a world without nuclear weapons is infinitely safer and more secure for us all. We therefore welcomed the entry into force of the TPNW last year and recall Jamaica's contribution to that effort by being among the 50 ratifying states. We are therefore pleased that we can convene in this first meeting of states parties, where together we can consolidate efforts to advance the implementation of the treaty. While our treaty is new, it is a clear demonstration of the belief of the majority of the world that there is neither a legal nor moral justification for the development, possession, reliance on, or use of nuclear weapons in any context. This new treaty finally completes the tripartite prohibition on weapons of mass destruction and further advances the work of nuclear disarmament, an achievement which is highly commendable. We meet at a time of multiple and intersecting crises. The world is only beginning to emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic, which disrupted lives and livelihoods. We face a looming debt and economic crisis. Climate change threatens our present and our future. And most pertinent to our context, the global political and security climate appears to be at its worst in decades. In this environment, it is even more critical for us to implement the TPNW and to champion its universalization. We must aim to ensure that the treaty's provision establish new norms and reinforce it as an indispensable part of the global disarmament architecture. This will mean not only undertaking actions within our own jurisdictions, but also bringing the principles underlying the TPNW into our engagements with parties and non-parties in multilateral, regional, and bilateral fora, thereby pursuing Article 12's obligation of universalization of a treaty. Mr. President, nuclear weapon states elevate these weapons as a symbol of power, prestige, and strength. Some others view possession as a status to be achieved, a strategic advantage to secure. These false and archaic approaches must be countered and dismantled. As champions of nuclear disarmament, we have a responsibility to shift these narratives by influencing public perception and promoting the better alternative. seeking, possessing, or threatening to use nuclear weapons must become a badge of shame, a label of irresponsibility, and a demonstration of the worst disregard of humanity possible. We commit to working with other states parties as well as partners outside of governments to ensure that public awareness is harnessed as a tool to influence public policy on this consequential issue. Mr. President, far from ensuring security, nuclear weapons threaten our survival. The risks are much too high. The effects are immediate, far-reaching, and irreversible. As we have been reminded recently, whether from the threat of use, the risk of use, or the possibility of unintended detonation, there is no guarantee of peace and security from the existence of these indiscriminate weapons. Instead, the security environment deteriorates and the ability to exercise control over a conflict worsens. There is an innate fallacy in the nuclear deterrence doctrine that relies on the concept of mutually assured destruction. How does one keep your opponent in check by threatening to destroy oneself as well? This very doctrine is itself an obstacle to maintaining international peace and security. The imperative to achieve a world without nuclear weapons remains as pertinent as ever. We must take targeted steps forward and not reverse to the past approaches that only serve to heighten tensions and place the world on the brink of conflict and catastrophe. In our 21st century, globalized, interconnected, and interdependent world, there is no room for the continuation of end-of-the-world scenarios. We have learned from the COVID-19 pandemic, from climate change and other development crises, from terrorism and cybercrime, that we can no longer isolate and protect only our individual countries, pursuing narrow self-interests. The use of a nuclear weapon would result in incalculable damage, from the humanitarian to the environmental impact, from the economic to the political dimension. It is a risk we cannot afford and must continue all our efforts to eliminate. Jamaica therefore welcomes the adoption of the Vienna Declaration that will take place from this first meeting of states parties, as well as the agreements that we are working on that will be reached that will take us forward in the implementation of the treaty. We reaffirm our full support and pledge to work in solidarity with all parties and relevant stakeholders to achieve a safer, more secure world. And we remain resolute in our conviction that this should become a world without nuclear weapons. I thank you.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Jamaica for his statement. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Costa Rica, to be followed by Panama and Cote d'Ivoire. Costa Rica, please.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Para mi país.
Thank you, Chair. For my country, this first meeting of the states parties is especially significant, not only because Costa Rica had the honour of presiding over negotiations that led to the adoption of the TPNW, but also because we see it as a triumph for multilateralism and clear evidence of a commitment to collective solutions. We believe in a safer world for all people, guaranteeing at the same time the survival of all species that live on this planet. Today, we are starting out on a hugely symbolic chapter in the history of peace and security. While lots has changed since humanity first knew about the devastating effects of nuclear weapons, this is the most significant concrete step taken to avoid the consequences of nuclear weapons. This is the most important legal instrument in the past 20 years in terms of security. And so we're embarking on a new era, forging new international security paradigms, aiming to use models designed through and for peace rather than fear. Costa Rica would like to welcome all states that have joined this collective effort since it started. In particular, today, Guatemala. We would like to congratulate them on their recent ratification, as well as Cabo Verde, Grenada, and Timor-Leste, for depositing the instrument of ratification. This first meeting of state parties is being held in a difficult political and security context. We urgently need to coherently respond to the challenges that we are facing as an international community. We find ourselves at a turning point where old national security models based on deterrence and threat through the certainty of assured mutual destruction have been seen to be out of date, unjustified and insufficient. Various studies have projected that it would just require the partial use of the nuclear arsenal belonging to one of the great nuclear powers to cause a nuclear winter that would threaten food security for more than 2 billion people around the zone of impact, as well as causing severe environmental damage. The migratory crisis caused by hunger and environmental disaster, which would in turn affect global stability in the region of impact and cause a chain reaction that would even affect the economy, causing in turn severe damage for the whole international community. It's clear that these models, based on assured mutual nuclear destruction, have real ramifications do not consider, in fact, the real ramifications of potential nuclear conflict, whose reach is cross-border. Minimizing the impact of nuclear weapons is incompatible with peace and security. And so we need a new international security structure, which does not use the old limited and fragile models. We need to strengthen dialogue, good practice and awareness raising to ensure commitment from all stakeholders. The first meeting of states parties is also a perfect opportunity for us to underscore the fact that the nuclear threat is a national security topic that affects all states equally, with consequences for the environment, public health, economy, geopolitics, in a world that is ever more interconnected. President Costa Rica welcomes the working agenda that we have before us, in particular because it gives us an opportunity to discuss the central topics for making this treaty operational. My delegation would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone who helped draw up the various working documents for their efforts and the excellent work carried out during the preparatory period. The documents that we have in front of us are a faithful reflection of the constructive contributions made to help us look at efforts for operationalisation using inclusive, comprehensive strategies that encourage the long-term future of the TPNW. We would particularly like to welcome the efforts made for the full, equal and meaningful participation of women in the TPNW process, and considers the recommendation to highlight the urgent nature of incorporating the gender perspective in all of our policies, programmes and national projects to be incredibly important. We also believe it's very important that we look at the positive commitments of the treaty, particularly for civil society, particularly the commitment to help the victims of these weapons. President Costa Rica would like to express its recognition for your leadership and the valuable work that your team has carried out in preparing for this first meeting. Our country would like to welcome the efforts made by Austria, and we would like to take this opportunity to reiterate our commitment to help achieve successful results from this first meeting. We would also like to congratulate you, President, for the successful meeting held yesterday on the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons, with effective and proactive participation from experts in civil society as well as academia. I would like to wrap up by expressing our wish that we build on this process started at this first meeting so that we can witness effective progress made in our commitments. We must hope that we no longer bear witness to pain, but that we are stakeholders in a better future for future generations. Thank you.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Costa Rica for his statement. And I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Panama.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you, President. I'd firstly like to express our recognition for the work carried out by the Austrian government under your leadership, President, in the preparatory phase leading up to this historic meeting, and I would like to also congratulate you on your election to lead our work in this first meeting of states parties to the TPNW. The combined effort to maintaining international peace and security and to achieving the goal of general and complete disarmament has been a focus for state parties to this treaty, with a view to achieving the key goal of multilateralism and the international system. Panama, as a member state and a founding member of the UN, remains firmly convinced and attached to the idea of respect for the fundamental purposes and principles of the UN Charter, which is why we are deeply concerned at the modernization of nuclear arsenals, as well as their delivery systems, materials, and associated technologies, including hypersonic weapons, stealth cruise missiles, and systems using artificial intelligence. These all prove that we're seeing a new arms race. And unfortunately, development and innovations in this field will undermine the principles and goals of the TPNW. And so we need to take actions to stave off the harmful consequences of the use of nuclear weapons, which are attack against the survival of this planet. The complete and definitive elimination of nuclear weapons is the only way that we can build international trust as a guarantor of peace. The holding of this first meeting of states parties to the TPNW is a historic opportunity at a time when international peace is endangered. And it should give us a moment to think, and to think about how we can act with greater responsibility. The conflict in Ukraine and the growing atmosphere of confrontation in Asia have broken with the idea of an understanding based on dialogue, trust building and cooperation between nuclear weapon states, which increases concerns about their possession and any threats of their use. President, the International Court of Justice, in its advisory opinion on 8th of July 1996, stated that international customary and treaty law does not contain any specific prescription authorizing the threat or use of nuclear weapons. It's essential that governments, international organizations, NGOs, and civil society do not remain quiet in the face of this threat, as it is no longer a latent threat but a very real threat of the use of nuclear weapons. According to figures on the fact sheet, the 2022 fact sheet from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, only just 2 nuclear powers hold 90% of the over 12,705 nuclear warheads that make up the global arsenal, 3,732 of which are deployed and ready, and at least 2,000 of which have operational capacity to be launched at any moment, with sufficient power to, by accident or design, trigger global extinction. President, in February, in Latin America, we mark the 55th anniversary of the opening for signature of the Tlatelolco Treaty, a legal instrument which turned the Latin American and Caribbean region into the first populated nuclear weapons-free zone, becoming a benchmark for the world in terms of disarmament, international security and peace. We believe that the NPT works along with the TPNW, which we hope will enter into force soon. With the CTBT, which we hope will enter into force soon, and the TPNW, which will help directly to achieve the goal of complete nuclear disarmament. As leaders, it is up to us to act quickly to promote a universal understanding of the irrational nature of nuclear weapons. Their elimination, as agreed upon in this treaty, is an existential and ethical imperative for current and future generations. We must achieve definitive agreements to avoid humanity's self-destruction. And so we believe there is a need to adopt an action plan through which, as state parties, we commit to adopting concrete actions and working together to promote the universalization and implementation of the treaty, as well as to strengthen international cooperation to promote compliance with the positive commitments under the treaty. We recognise that there are diverse national circumstances and security circumstances that various states are facing, and also adopting actions which help with its implementation, in particular through the development of fora, conferences, courses and other activities that support its relevance and the goals and aims of the treaty. So Panama would like to reiterate the importance of promoting equal, full and effective participation and leadership of men and women in the nuclear sphere, recognising the disproportionate effect of ionizing radiation on women and children, as well as the value contribution made by gender considerations when it comes to monitoring weapons and non-proliferation and disarmament. At this, our initial meeting, we should take a look at routes and strategies through which member states of the TPNW can make progress in universalization, encouraging and raising awareness so that more states sign this treaty and ratify it, and providing support when they need it in terms of complying with their obligations. This is why we are delighted, and we would like to congratulate and join our voices in welcoming Timor-Leste, Grenada, Cabo Verde and Guatemala for their recent accession to the treaty. And so, to conclude, in line with Panama's long-standing position in favour of disarmament, I would like to state that Panama will continue to be committed to achieving one of the key goals of this treaty, which is achieving peace in a world free of nuclear weapons. Thank you very much, Chair.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Panama, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Côte d'Ivoire, to be followed by Vietnam, Comoros and Malta. And I would like to remind all delegations to try to stick to the 5 minutes limit, because we still have a very long speakers list. Thank you very much. Côte d'Ivoire, the floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, President. Sir, on behalf of my delegation, I would like to welcome the holding of the first conference of states parties to the TPNW. I would also like to congratulate you, sir, on your outstanding election to the first meeting. Allow me, sir, to reassure you of my delegation's readiness to assist you to ensure the success of your mission. Mr. President, various circumstances led to the designing of different treaties on nuclear testing. These are the same ones that led to the drafting of the TPNW in 2017. That is, hotspots, conflicts, ongoing nuclear threats, as well as increased nuclear power of nuclear states, leading to fear, mistrust internationally. This means heightened risk of an arms race. As each day goes by, complete and general disarmament and a world free of nuclear weapons grow further and further out of reach. Security threats and the changing nature of conflicts, as well as disastrous humanitarian consequences, mean that there's a need for new legal instruments. In this regard, my country took active part in negotiations on the TPNW and is thus very pleased with its entry into force. As a pillar and in completion of the, and rather in complementing the NPT, the TPNW seeks to bolster trust and reduce risk. So we are committed to a nuclear weapons-free world. We've committed to international peace and security, in particular general and complete disarmament under strict and effective international monitoring. These have been the guiding principles, in fact, of our foreign policy. All of this has led to the ratification of the main oversight and prohibition treaties on nuclear weapons, as well as the establishment of the Floyd Boeing Prize with the help of UNESCO. That was the first president of Côte d'Ivoire. The ratification of the TPNW, thus, is part of our constant drive against nuclear weapons and our contribution to creating a world of peace. Sir, security and peace should be our daily goals. They can be lastingly strengthened when all states resolutely commit to nuclear disarmament, when fear and terror that has struck the world are no longer a part of it, and instead peace and security reign. In this regard, the entry into force of the TPNW is a source of inspiration for our peoples and states. The treaty is a process. It implies global awareness and a broadening of existing legal instruments when it comes to nuclear disarmament. The legal, historical, political, and even moral values of the treaty have led us to encourage states who have not yet done so to accede to it, to ensure that steadfast progress continues to be made under strict and effective international monitoring. It is along these lines that I would come to the conclusion of my statement, reiterating my commitment to the success of this conference. Thank you.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Côte d'Ivoire, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Vietnam.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the government of Vietnam, I would like to congratulate and highly appreciate the Austrian government for hosting the first meeting of the state parties of the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. This significant meeting reflects the international community desires for a world free of nuclear weapons. Vietnam supports and strongly believes that under your chairmanship, Mr. President, the meeting will achieve fruitful results, contributing to our effort to the above-mentioned target. Nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, as we already witnessed, have been responsible for severe and long-term consequences for mankind, threatening global peace and security. Against this backdrop, Vietnam would like to emphasize that all states shall fully comply with and implement international law in good faith to prevent those dangerous weapons. Vietnam experienced grave consequences of war and armed conflicts, so we maintain our full support for the disarmament of weapons of mass destruction, including nuclear weapons. Vietnam is the party to and constructively implements essential international and regional instruments such as the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, and the Southeast Asian Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone Treaty. Vietnam also strictly implements all obligations enshrined in Security Council Resolution 1540 in 2004 on responsibly preventing weapons of mass destruction. Mr. President, Vietnam is the 10th state ratifying the TPNW. We submitted the declaration in accordance with Article 2 of the treaty. Vietnam, furthermore, has consolidated our own mechanism, including strengthening our legislation and establishing the infrastructure to monitor and prevent weapons of mass destruction. Vietnam is of the view that nuclear disarmament, unfortunately, has not been advanced as our wish. Additionally, we share the concerns about the world's current political and security situation. In this context, Vietnam highlights the significance of the TPNW. The treaty should be regarded as a cornerstone for constructing the international legal framework as well as the cooperative regime of nuclear non-proliferation disarmament. In order to encourage the implementation of the TPNW, Vietnam would like to suggest the following points. First, we call upon all states to consent to be bound by the TPNW and fully implement the treaty, as well as other international instruments on nuclear non-proliferation disarmament. Second, we necessitate the acceleration of international cooperation within the treaty's framework toward a non-nuclear weapon world. Third, Vietnam stresses the right of all states to carry out research, application, and transfer of nuclear science and technologies for peaceful purposes. Lawfully cooperation in this field assists the international community in responding to global challenges, including diseases and climate change. Therefore, Vietnam maintains our support and constructive participation in all initiatives and projects to peacefully develop nuclear technology for sustainable development in accordance with international law, in the auspices of the United Nations and the International Atomic Energy Agency. In conclusion, Vietnam would like to reaffirm our full support for state parties meeting to the TPNW. We are confident that this process will help actively contribute to the universalization of this vital legal binding instrument. Thank you for your kind attention.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Vietnam, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Comoros.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, de me donner la parole.
Thank you very much, Chairman. President, rather. I would like to begin by expressing how pleased that I am to see you presiding our meeting. I would also like to thank your team for the manner in which all of you have been leading our meeting. So we're very pleased with the high-quality statements from other delegations before me. They have contributed, as we would like to the enrichment of our position on the prohibition of nuclear weapons and testing. That is the reason that we signed the TPNW in 2017 and ratified it in February 2022. Progress has been made in promoting this global cause. However, much remains to be done. For a full elimination of nuclear weapons, available data says that several thousands about nuclear weapons continue to proliferate across the globe. Those countries with these type of weapons have financed $billion worth of long-term plans. The ongoing maintenance of these weapons could instead be used to serve green energy. In particular, at this time, a time in the world where the international community has decided to focus on the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals in an approach seeking to promote peace, security, and development to serve global populations and their prosperity and well-being. President, the nuclear deterrence doctrine that has been put forth by some countries so as to legitimize their use of nuclear weapons is particularly of concern. This is an international context that is most worrying. It is a serious threat to peace, in particular with the threat of use of nuclear weapons that we're seeing today. The world is changing, and as such, we understand that one thing and one thing only is necessary: peace. Peace is the only way to ensure to each state and each individual on Earth a happy life, one of progress and prosperity. I come from an island country and thus must speak about nuclear weapons while also touching on the risks tied with climate change and agriculture. I believe that these two, the threat of nuclear weapons and climate change, are the two main challenges before humanity today, in particular for small island developing states. Nuclear weapons damage the environment far before they're even used. Uranium mines, nuclear dumps pollute the earth and force people to leave their homes. The TPNW deals with this matter in Article 6. It obliges states to assist victims as well as to remediate environmental pollution due to nuclear weapons or testing. The TPNW was established in light of the irremediable damage that could be caused by nuclear weapons. Cooperation from the international community is necessary so as to properly address the issue of nuclear weapons. So, as we took part in the talks on the treaty, we're very pleased to see its entry into force in January 2021. We also welcome the fact that the treaty makes progress towards a world free of nuclear weapons, as well as encouraging states who've not yet done so to accede to the treaty. Financial institutions, businesses, or enterprises producing nuclear weapons, civil society, parliaments, all of these have adopted resolutions or decisions calling on their governments to accede to the treaty. By way of conclusion, I would like to congratulate Timor-Leste, Grenada, and Cabo Verde for having acceded to ratified the treaty. We would encourage other countries who've not yet done so to do so, because each new signature and ratification of this important legal tool strengthens the global resolve against the use and manufacturing of nuclear weapons for a world that is yet further away from the nuclear threat. I would like to sincerely hope that this first meeting of states parties to the TPNW will design recommendations which can truly make peace and security priorities. As we know, peace and security are the sine qua nons for harmonious and sustainable development globally. Thank you.
The distinguished representative of the Comoros, and now give the floor to Malta, to be followed by Paraguay, Nicaragua, Nigeria, and Honduras. Malta.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We join others in congratulating you on your election as president of the first meeting of state parties to the TPNW, and we avail ourselves of this opportunity to also thank your team for the excellent conduct of the preparations. Malta is honored to participate in this historic first meeting. We convene today to mark indeed an important milestone. The entry into force of the treaty fills a long overdue and dangerous void that had been left in the international legal regime in the field of nuclear weapons. We hope that this treaty will be the catalyst of change in paradigm and trajectory. Today we also meet to reiterate our strong resolve against these weapons, but also to move a step forward and commit to concrete actions to implement our obligations under the TPNW. The current bleak geopolitical situation has created an even greater sense of urgency. Indeed, we gather here at a time when the conditions for regional and international security are deteriorating at a worrying pace, and where our endeavors to have a world free from nuclear weapons are increasingly challenged. The setbacks encountered in the efforts towards the renewal of the JCPOA, the constant violations of UNSC resolutions in the Korean Peninsula, and the risk posed by the nuclear arsenals are only a few of the challenges we currently face. The use of nuclear weapons is not anymore an abstract phenomenon or a remote nightmare. The most recent explicit threats by Russia have indeed transformed the unthinkable into a terrifying potential eventuality. So while we are pleased to be here to mark this historic milestone, we are aware that there is no room for jubilation. The current international situation is not only a reminder that we have to remain steadfast in our efforts, but a wake-up call for urgency to act. Mr. President, nuclear deterrence is not tantamount to security. This is simply an illusion. Only disarmament and a total prohibition of nuclear weapons can provide a security guarantee that these will never be used. Malta's unwavering commitment to the TPNW is driven primarily by the strong belief: no state, big or small, possessing nuclear capabilities or not, is immune of the array of transborder humanitarian consequences if these weapons were to be deployed. No state would be immune to the climate disruption, the agricultural and economic collapse, the mass human displacement and famine that would inevitably follow if a nuclear war were to be unleashed. As the mechanisms of this treaty are being developed, Malta would like to engage with fellow state parties and other relevant stakeholders in the implementation of the treaty, including the commitment to implement Articles 6 and 7 on international cooperation and assistance, as well as on environmental remediation, which are linked to the humanitarian objectives of the same treaty. Malta also believes that further knowledge on the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons will be needed in the years to come for state parties to continue to take decisions based on the most updated scientific knowledge. The series of conferences organized by Austria, ending with the one hosted yesterday, provided us with good opportunities and evidence of the impacts and the costs involved. In this regard, while we praise the work carried out on the President's paper on institutionalizing scientific and technical advice, I am happy to signal support on behalf of my country for the establishment of a scientific advisory group based on the mandate contained in the President's paper. Furthermore, Article 4 of the TPNW, which establishes the obligations towards a total ban of nuclear weapons, Malta sees merit that in the international intersessional period following this first meeting, state parties should translate the general obligations contained in the treaty into a specific mandate and guidance for the designation of a competent international authority. Mr. President, the universalization of the treaty is key if we want to reach our objectives. We shall spare no efforts aiming at convincing more countries to join the TPNW. We must continue to raise awareness of the treaty's positive contribution to disarmament, international peace, and security. Far from undermining the treaty on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, Malta believes that the TPNW complements and supports the NPT's nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation objectives, as it represents a concrete step towards implementing the NPT's Article 6 obligation to pursue negotiations on effective measures for nuclear disarmament. Ahead of the NPT REFCON scheduled for this August, we call on all NPT state parties to redouble their efforts in this regard. And in conclusion, Mr. President, it is our responsibility to ensure that a nuclear weapon-free world becomes a reality for the generations to come. We owe it to them and to all the victims and survivors. You can count on Malta's unwavering support towards this end. Thank you.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Malta for her statement. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Paraguay.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, President. It's a great honour for me to deliver this statement on behalf of the delegation of the Republic of Paraguay. First of all, we'd like to congratulate you on your election as President of this conference. We appreciate and sincerely value the enormous work carried out during the preparatory process ahead of this much anticipated first meeting of states parties. President, you have the full support of my delegation in ensuring the success of your work during this period of sessions. Paraguay completed the process of accession to the TPNW in January 2020 and became the 35th country to do this. Since then, we have seen another 27 states commit to this treaty and accede to it, and another 27 who have signed it. Paraguay celebrates these steps as undeniable evidence of the important achievement of that this treaty signifies for the global architecture when it comes to nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. The importance and serious nature of this treaty must be underscored. It is the first internationally binding treaty that establishes complete prohibition of nuclear weapons, and the commitment and responsibility undertaken by the states that have signed up to it and ratified it is huge. President, this first meeting of states parties is testament to our binding duty to ensure transparent and irreversible nuclear disarmament. Current politics have shown us that peace in our current international system can easily be threatened, and that the threat of nuclear weapons has never disappeared. What for some is synonymous with security, for the vast majority of the population is exactly the opposite. In fact, it's a latent risk that threatens groups' collective security and the well-being of current and future generations. Now, more than ever, states must commit to complete disarmament. Humanity can simply not once again suffer the consequences of a nuclear bomb. And so Paraguay is delighted to see that as states parties we have made the step of recognising the suffering caused by nuclear weapons and their catastrophic consequences for humanity. And so we would like to reassert that it is a moral imperative not only for security, but that this must guide the work of our treaty, as it is a responsibility of all states in the globe that the process of nuclear disarmament is complete and irreversible. Paraguay also welcomes the fact that this instrument works in harmony with other international instruments in our field, such as the NPT and the CTBT. We hope that the synergies between these different instruments are made the most of, and that we can open up paths for constructive dialogue between member states and secretariats to promote mutual understanding, strengthen international cooperation, and generate measures to establish trust in order that we can make progress towards our goal of achieving a world free of nuclear weapons and maintaining this. President, our country would once again like to reassert our commitment to the provisions of the Tlatelolco Treaty for prohibiting nuclear weapons in Latin America and the Caribbean. And so, in this regard, we would like to make a call to our counterparts in the region to transfer their commitments made under Tlatelolco to the TPNW. This would once again be a historic example of our regional responsibility for nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. We would also like to make a call on states committed in the different nuclear weapons-free zones to join this community of states, actively working for the complete prohibition of all activities related to nuclear weapons. We once again would like to welcome this historic landmark that the TPNW represents, which gives us a transparent and irreversible process for nuclear disarmament based on a universal and legally binding framework. Finally, we would like to make a call on nuclear weapon states to promote mutual understanding and to seriously look at the universal humanitarian request to achieve and maintain a world free of nuclear weapons. Esteemed representatives of states parties and observer states, you should know that this solution is not through simply increasing nuclear arsenals, but rather the solution will be found through dialogue, multilateralism, and an understanding that nuclear weapons are immoral and illegal. The solution is the achievement of peace. Thank you very much, Chair.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Paraguay for his statement, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Nicaragua.
Señor Presidente.
President, allow us to congratulate you and Vice Presidents for their election. You have our full support. We welcome the entry into force of this historic treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons and the holding of this first meeting of states parties. President, this historic instrument, which for the very first time prohibits the existence, use and threat to use nuclear weapons, which Nicaragua was proud to ratify, is a ray of hope for the international community when it comes to our efforts to achieve a world free of nuclear weapons. The treaty comes at a crucial moment in which we see it to be unjustified and unacceptable in our 7th year since implementing the Agenda 2030, and in the midst of an unprecedented health crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, we are continue to see increasing spending on developing, modernising and testing weapons of all different types, which are threatening humanity as a whole. Nicaragua is pleased to take part in this first meeting of states parties and would like to use this opportunity to insist before the whole international community on the importance of making progress for once and for all towards general and complete disarmament, in which our maximum priority should continue to be the elimination of nuclear weapons, which is indeed the central goal of this instrument. The greatest wish of the inhabitants of Mother Earth is for nuclear weapons to disappear, as they are an underlying threat for all of humanity, including the very people and countries that manufacture and possess them. We will continue to state that there is no plan B for saving Mother Earth from nuclear disaster, and the only guarantee to prevent the use or the threatened use of weapons of mass destruction and their non-proliferation is the total and absolute elimination of nuclear weapons. President, Nicaragua firmly believes that through establishing nuclear weapons-free zones, we will be able to strengthen the non-proliferation regime, as well as peace and international security. And this would be a significant contribution for achieving nuclear disarmament. On a regional level, we would like to reiterate the importance of the Tlatelolco Treaty, as well as the importance of the declaration of the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States as a zone of peace. We regret the fact that the resolution to hold a conference for the establishment of the Middle East as a nuclear weapons-free zone, as well as other weapons of mass destruction, was not complied with, and we call on the international community to urgently hold this conference. President, Nicaragua places particular importance on the compliance with the NPT, which is an internationally agreed instrument that is legally binding in the global non-proliferation system for the disarmament and peaceful use of atomic energy. We hope that the 10th review conference will be successful in order to preserve the credibility and integrity of the NPT. We need to make progress in our commitment to eliminate nuclear arsenals across the world, to ensure that they disappear from our planet, and to use the huge amount of resources that are dedicated to them to promote development of peoples, and most importantly, to achieve our most important and urgent goal, which is the eradication of poverty. Thank you.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Nicaragua for her statement. And now I invite the distinguished representative of Nigeria to be followed by Honduras, State of Palestine, and parliamentarians for TPNW. Nigeria, you have the floor.
President, in my national capacity, Nigeria wishes to thank the President, Ambassador Alexander Kmentt, for his efforts in coordinating the preparatory meetings towards the first meeting of state parties to the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, TPNW, in Vienna, and to express our support for your leadership and opening remarks. Nigeria appreciates the Secretary General for his introductory statement. Nigeria expresses our full support for the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and effective implementation of the treaty by all member states. We join other states parties to mark the entry into force of the treaty and have the following points to make. Mr. President, we wish to recall that Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons program is a necessary step towards achieving a world free of nuclear weapons and threat to international peace and security. On realization of the implication for violating the sanctity of the international laws and crimes against humanity under Articles 1 and 5, Nigeria has made commitment towards safety, security, and safeguards in the application of nuclear materials. It also fulfilled its obligations and has sustained it. Nigeria has implemented all its measures on the prohibition of nuclear weapons with the enactment of the National Nuclear Safety and Radiation Protection Act, CAF 142, Laws of the Federation of Nigeria. The Act establishes, among others, Nigeria Nuclear Regulatory Authority and gave it responsibility to perform all necessary functions that will enable Nigeria meet its national and international safety, security, and safeguards obligation in the application of nuclear energy and ionizing radiation. Nigeria has a regulatory control program which comprises authorization, regulation, and guides inspection and oversight functions, emergency planning and response. The Nigeria National Nuclear Regulatory Agency, in collaboration with the Nigeria Atomic Energy Commission, reviewed the act that resulted into a bill on the nuclear safety, security, and safeguards in the country. In line with Article 2 of the TPNW, Nigeria has a national obligation to declare to the first meeting of state parties that Nigeria does not own, possess, or control nuclear weapons or nuclear explosive devices. There are no nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices in our territory or in any other place under its jurisdiction or control that are owned, possessed, or controlled by another state. Nigeria has also made commitment on nuclear safeguards. Nigeria is also a signatory to the Nuclear Weapons Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, and thereafter entered into a comprehensive safeguards agreements with the IAEA for the application of safeguards in connection with the Non-Proliferation Treaty and additional protocol to the safeguards. Nigeria has enforced the Nuclear Safeguards Regulation 2021. Other areas of Nigeria's national implementation measures include total elimination of nuclear weapons in line with Article 4 by owning a 34 kilowatts nuclear research reactor donated by the IAEA under a technical cooperation project for neutron activation analysis, education and training, and a project in collaboration with the IAEA, the United States of America, and China, which targeted combating the reactor from high-enriched uranium to low-enriched uranium. This reactor operates on low-enriched uranium now. Nigeria has taken to fully implement the TPNW in victims assistance and environmental remediation projects in line with Article 6 of the treaty. Furthermore, Nigeria has signed the following conventions, namely the Basel Convention on the Control of Transboundary Movements of Hazardous Waste and their disposal, and 2 Joint Convention on the Safety of Spent Fuel Management and on the Safety of Radioactive Waste Management. Nigeria has also developed and is enforcing the Nigerian Radioactive Waste Management Regulation, the Nigeria Safety Regulation for the Management of Naturally Occurring Radioactive Materials, the Nigeria Nuclear Fuel Cycle and Radioactive Waste Management Policy, and Nuclear Fuel Cycle and Radioactive Waste Management Strategy, among others. As regards Article 7 of the TPNW, Nigeria is a party to the Convention on Early Notification in case of nuclear accident and the Convention on Assistance in the case of nuclear accident or radiological emergency. On universalization, Nigeria wishes to express its commitment to the universalization and has continuously supported universalization at the United Nations General Assembly since 2018, and Nigeria calls upon all states to sign, ratify, or accede to the treaty to ensure universalization. Mr. President, with this, Nigeria appreciates the first meeting of the state parties to the TPNW for their attention and further expresses support for the leadership of Mr. President and the TPNW. Nigeria expresses support for the Vienna Declaration and Action Plan. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Nigeria for his statement. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Honduras.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, President. On behalf of the Government of Honduras, I would like to congratulate you for election as President of this first meeting of the TPNW, as well as your Vice Presidents, and we are sure that under your leadership we will have success in our conference. Honduras is proud to be participating in this first meeting of state parties to the TPNW, which is a historic event that brings us together following the entry into force of the treaty on the 22nd of January 2021, with the depositing of the instrument of ratification number 50 by our country on the 24th of October 2020. Honduras is a peaceful country. We are fully committed to the prohibition of nuclear weapons, and we are a state party to the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in Latin America, which designated our region as a nuclear weapons-free zone and has done so since 1969. We are hugely delighted and also committed to be here meeting today in order to reassert our belief that the only way to eliminate the risk of the use of nuclear weapons is by eliminating the weapons, and to make progress with the commitment that the international community assumed recently in 2015 of promoting development in line with the Agenda 2030. We have not complied with these commitments, and our world is continuously threatened by the growth in the number of weapons, in particular nuclear weapons. My country is convinced that nuclear weapons do not represent security for anybody, but rather a threat to all. And so, in this spirit, Honduras would like to make a call on states that have not yet done so to ratify this treaty or to sign this treaty, and to agree to the terms in order that together we can achieve this major goal of leaving our future generations a world free of nuclear weapons. President, this commitment is a moral and historic imperative. As a lot of our colleagues have already said, we do not have a planet B. We have just one world, and we must, and I reiterate this, we must save it from the threat of destruction that would be caused by nuclear weapons. Finally, in front of the whole world, Honduras would like to state its commitment to this noble cause. We wish every success in our work, and we will do everything we can to raise our voice for this effort in all bodies that we participate in. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Honduras for her statement. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the State of Palestine.
Sayyid al-Rais.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, representatives of states parties,
observers, and representatives of the civil society. The State of Palestine aligns itself to statements delivered earlier in addressing their appreciation to the President of the first meeting of the states parties to the TPNW. We thank you for the preparatory work, and we thank all those who participated in the negotiations on the treaty that have allowed us to get to this point, which constitutes a victory to international multilateralism and a victory to the UN Charter and international law. We are fully confident in the able leadership of the President, which would guarantee positive outcomes in the service of this treaty. The State of Palestine President is keen to participate actively in the international and multilateralism arena when it comes to the disarmament, and particularly weapons of mass destruction which threaten international peace and security. Equally, we participate actively in the international legal arena pertaining to cooperation in the field of peaceful uses of atomic energy, particularly under the aegis of the IAEA. The State of Palestine particularly has submitted its preliminary declaration under Article 2 of the TPNW. Currently, we are completing the constitutional and legal procedures so as the Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement concluded with the IAEA may enter into force. Generally, the State of Palestine deems that the priority of full disarmament must take place under a strict international control, allowing for dismantling such nuclear weapons which constitute a threat and unjustifiable suffering. That is the threat of use of this type of weapons in contravention of international law and the UN Charter. Over 7 decades, we sought to establish peace, and here we are threatened by the very existence of these weapons. We fully reject this type of arms as they constitute an existential threat to peoples and a continuous threat to international peace and security. The people of Palestine over long decades suffers from the Israeli occupation, which possesses this type of arms and refuses to abide by any of the principles of international law, including a refusal to adhere to the NPT and a refusal to place its nuclear facilities under the IAEA safeguards regime. When the international community accepted this international disbalanced system in 1969, when we adopted the NPT, we expected at the time that this imbalance will be a temporary one, particularly if we bear in mind Article 6, which provides that all states parties must, in good faith, continue to negotiate to put an end to arms race and to dismantle nuclear arms. Nonetheless, in contrary to Article 6 of the treaty, and in bad faith, negotiations sought to politicize the work of the IAEA, in addition to the fact that some countries violated and placed hurdles before the creation of establishment of nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction free zones. In addition to violating the 1995 decision on the creation of a zone free of nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East, thus granted an unworthy protection to Israel, the sole country in the Middle East which possesses nuclear weapons, aggressive nuclear weapons program. President, the State of Palestine deems that this meeting is a good opportunity to negotiate on a scientific multilateral basis in order to establish a new regime compatible with the NPT regime, which would complement us and further bolsters it, and grants it further purviews to verify in compliance with Article 4 of the TPNW and in coordination with the international community and for the provision of assistance to victims as per Article 6 and 7 of the TPNW. We call for active action to prohibit the development of nuclear weapons and underscore customary and legal principles and the need for the establishment of new laws in line with Article 12 of TPNW. In conclusion, we wish this conference all success so as to serve the common international interest in ridding the world of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, and thus allowing for more cooperation and development. Thank you, sir.
I thank the distinguished representative of the State of Palestine. I now give the floor to parliamentarians for the TPNW, and the interpreters have allowed us to go 10 minutes past 6, parliamentarians for TPNW will be followed by Cook Islands and Guatemala. Parliamentarians for TPNW, please.
Thank you, President. As parliamentarians determined to rid the world of the scourge of nuclear weapons, we are honored to address this first meeting of state parties to the TPNW, which marks an historic waypoint in our journey towards a world free of these weapons. We are pleased to speak alongside the governments, organizations, and civil society representatives who have worked with such determination and persistence to get to this moment and with whom we have been privileged to cooperate. As legislators, we express our profound satisfaction with the entry into force of the treaty in January 2022. Nuclear weapons are now comprehensively prohibited under international law. The TPNW completes the international legal regime prohibiting weapons of mass destruction, opening the way to the total elimination of these weapons worldwide. We are proud of the role we have played in helping to bring this urgently needed treaty into force, working to persuade governments of its importance and supporting the processes of ratification. As people's representatives, we reiterate our determination to ensure that our nation's citizens and every nation's citizens never experience the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of the use of nuclear weapons. We remain painfully aware that there can be no adequate response to the detonation of a nuclear weapon. As long as these weapons exist, we all live with an intolerable and horrific risk. We support a renewed focus on the gendered and racialized impacts of nuclear weapons. Along with climate change, nuclear weapons pose an existential threat to humanity, threatening to wreak destruction of the social fabric of our societies. Despite the repeated commitments and promises from nuclear-armed states to disarm, more than 12,000 nuclear weapons remain today. Immense sums are being spent to modernize and upgrade them, and the risks are growing. Russia's recent threats to use nuclear weapons have heated tensions, reduced the threshold for use of nuclear weapons, and greatly increased the risk of nuclear conflict and global catastrophe. We express serious concern about the increased push for legitimizing deterrence and nuclear sharing as security measures. We therefore resolve to redouble our efforts to increase the membership of this treaty and to support its implementation. In recognition of the efforts of colleagues who have been instrumental in convincing their governments to observe this first meeting of state parties, we will work to build support among parliamentarians of state parties, We will work to support among parliamentarians for the treaty, to persuade our governments to join, to create conducive conditions for disarmament, and to speed the process of ratification. We will emphasize the role of the TPNW in complementing and reinforcing the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and we will continue to support all measures that contribute to nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation and reduce nuclear risks. We will engage constructively with policymakers in nuclear-armed states and their allies in the interest of enhancing international security and making progress towards our shared goal of a world free of nuclear weapons. We will work to allocate the resources needed to ensure that the provisions of this treaty are fully implemented. We will make full use of the knowledge, the skills, expertise, and energy assembled at this meeting of state parties, and we invite state parties, signatories, international organizations, and civil society to work closely with us. We call on our parliamentary colleagues around the world to sign the ICANN Parliamentary Pledge and to join us on our vital mission. Many challenges lie before us, but we are confident. We have banned nuclear weapons, and we will eliminate them.
I would like to thank parliamentarians for the TPNW for that statement and express, I think on behalf of all states parties, appreciation of parliamentarians, specifically from states that have not yet joined the TPNW, to engage and express our hope that your voices will take this message back into your countries and engage in dialogue on this treaty and bring more countries on board. Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Cook Islands.
Thank you, Mr. President. In the interest of time, I think I'll just summarize our statement and then provide the full version to the Secretariat. The Cook Islands would join others, like to join others in congratulating you, sir, on your assumption of the presidency of this body. Indeed, looking at your extensive resume, it's hard to imagine anyone better qualified to lead us in this important work. Colleagues, much has been made of the very painful legacy nuclear testing has had in our Pacific Island region. For the Cook Islands, sandwiched as we are between two major testing sites in Kiribati and French Polynesia, we have long been aware of the ongoing threat of nuclear weapons, and it prompted us to sign the South Pacific Nuclear Free Zone Treaty in 1985 when it was finalized for signature in our capital island of Rarotonga. Given our very proactive stance on this issue in our region, it took little encouragement for us to become one of the first to accede to this treaty in 2018 and one of 10 from our region to help it over the threshold needed to bring it into force. It's a chief reason why our delegation has traveled so far to be here in Vienna and lend our voice to those of others in calling for the elimination of nuclear weapons and progressing our work here to bring us closer to that ultimate goal. Indeed, the recent nuclear saber rattling compels us to do so. Mr. President, our resolve has been strengthened as we listened this morning to the painful testimony of those who have experienced firsthand the terrible effects of nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons testing. And we noted the linkages made by the Prime Minister of Fiji in relation to the nuclear legacy effects on our ocean space and of climate change, with the sea level rise exposing previously buried radioactive material that still remains in our islands. It's important, therefore, that the work we do in those other agencies, in those other forums, complements the work we do here in this respect. Before I conclude, Mr. President, I'd like to thank the Government of New Zealand and others who have contributed financially to ensure that our small countries are able to attend this important first session, and we do hope such support will continue into the future. Lastly, the Cook Islands will go back and encourage those in our region who have not yet signed this treaty to do so as a matter of priority. Mr. President, we stand ready to support you and your able Secretariat and the work of this body in the days, months and years to come. Danke and kia manuia.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Cook Islands and now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Guatemala.
Thank you, President. Allow me to begin by congratulating you for presiding over this historic meeting, the first meeting of states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Similarly, I would like to congratulate all members of the Bureau. We know that under your leadership, we are sure to be successful in this meeting. On the 2nd of March 2022, the Congress of the Republic of Guatemala agreed to accede to this treaty. And so on the 3rd of June of this year, our Minister for Foreign Affairs personally deposited the instrument of ratification for the TPNW. This act by the government of Guatemala, carried out ahead of this meeting and promoted with direct involvement of the President of the Republic, reasserts the Guatemalan state's commitment to general and complete, verifiable and irreversible disarmament. In this respect, it's also important to highlight that with Guatemala's ratification of the TPNW, Central America has become the first region in the world to have completely accepted the legal framework for the prohibition of nuclear weapons. And this is a fact that shouldn't necessarily be surprising, especially given that Latin America and the Caribbean is the first populated area of the world that is a nuclear weapons-free zone since 1969 through the Tlatelolco Treaty. President, Guatemala welcomes the entry into force of this treaty, which explicitly bans nuclear weapons, along with biological and chemical weapons. And we welcome this treaty being included in the international regime, and would like to reiterate the need and commitment that all states have to comply with international law, including international humanitarian law and international human rights law. My delegation trusts that this treaty will facilitate the elimination of nuclear weapons, and so we can achieve our common goal of a world free of weapons of mass destruction, which will help us to maintain international peace and security in line with the purposes and principles of the UN Charter. President, we are gravely concerned that nuclear weapons states are continuing to include this type of weapons as part of their security policies. Furthermore, these nuclear states are increasing their nuclear arsenals in both qualitative and quantitative ways. We need to put an end to this, and we underscore that these resources could be better used for peaceful purposes, such as development and the comprehensive well-being of humanity or environmental protection. Guatemala would also like to make a call for nuclear weapons states to abstain from using or threatening to use not only their nuclear arsenal, but force in general. The illegal, unjustified and unprovoked invasion into the sovereign territory of Ukraine by the Russian Federation is a clear example of the fact that having nuclear weapons is in and of itself a threat, and is one more reason why nuclear weapon states should move immediately towards nuclear disarmament as contained within Article 6 of the NPT. President, all states share the responsibility to achieve nuclear disarmament, to prevent the proliferation of nuclear weapons, to prevent any use or threatened use of nuclear weapons, to prevent the humanitarian consequences caused by nuclear weapons, as well as assisting victims and dealing with the environmental damage caused by the use of weapons or testing of nuclear bombs. To conclude, President, Guatemala places great emphasis on the gender focus in this treaty and would like to point out the importance of equal, full and effective participation of men and women when it comes to nuclear disarmament, which is indeed a great achievement, the result of great efforts, which will also require nuclear weapons states to reject the very existence of nuclear weapons. Thank you very much, President.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Guatemala for his statement, and as the last speaker for the meeting today, I would like to give the floor to the distinguished representative of Indonesia.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, let me join others in congratulating you, Ambassador Kmentt, on your assumption as the president of this first meeting. My delegation certainly commend you and your team in stewarding our effort to the past 1 year to prepare this very anticipated meeting. Let me also express appreciation to the government of Austria for the hospitality extended to our delegation. Mr. President, today, for the first time ever, state parties, signatory state, supporting stakeholders of the treaty gather here to kick off the first meeting of the state parties and to reaffirm our unequivocal commitment toward a world free of the nuclear weapon. Indonesia is proud to join this notable day to be part of the right side of history. Mr. President, nuclear disarmament remains our shared highest priority. Yet, for so long, we are far from achieving this goal. We are even in the brink of going further. The practical steps on nuclear disarmament are barely implemented. Nuclear armed states continue to maintain, modernize, upgrade, or expand their arsenals. Reliance on nuclear weapons is still maintained by nuclear armed states and their allies. It is indeed under this circumstance we value the treaty as well as appreciate each and every state parties and signatory state to the treaty. The treaty warrants us a strong hope for finally providing a legal framework to delegitimize nuclear weapons, raising moral barriers against nuclear weapon threats. We reaffirm that the treaty serves as important building blocks in our collective multilateral effort to achieve the goal zero on nuclear weapons. We also reaffirm that the treaty reinforces the existing norm and measure. Mr. President, while our hope for this treaty is unambiguous, this meeting is definitely the beginning of our long chapter. There are so much to be done in realizing the aims of this treaty. But I am optimistic to note that we have 86 country signatories, abundant of relevant stakeholders. Indonesia is about to ratify this treaty. Meanwhile, Indonesia has already established supportive laws and regulations to accommodate the treaty into our national regulation system. Mr. President, let us seize the momentum of this first meeting to achieve produce meaningful outcome that could provide both political and concrete guidance for our effort ahead. To conclude, rest assured of Indonesia's unwavering support to the TPNW and commitment toward the achievement of a world free of nuclear weapons. I thank you.
I would like to thank the distinguished representative of Indonesia for his statement. This concludes the list of speakers for today. But, dear colleagues, distinguished delegates, we have 17 speakers remaining on the list of speakers for the general exchange of views. We will therefore continue the general exchange of views at our next meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. And the remainder of the program for the day will have to be adjusted accordingly. The meeting is adjourned.